listen to this podcast, or I'll gut you.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast. Today we have Adam Cesare on the podcast. Adam Cesare is the author of awesome indie horror novels like Tribesmen, Video Night, The First One You Expect, The Con Season, and The Summer Job, as well as the YA novel Clown in a Cornfield and the upcoming Clown in a Cornfield 2, Frendo Lives. He runs a popular horror movie and book-themed YouTube channel called Project Black T-Shirt and was named one of the 10 sexiest writers of 2021 by the Film Daily. Please welcome Adam Cesare to the podcast. How you doing?
I'm so glad you included the sexiest writer thing, because that's what I put on my resume. Yeah, on everywhere. It's great to meet you guys. Typically, I've done not that I'm like a podcast expert, but I've done a few podcasts now and to talk about Clown 2, but no one's introduced me with the old books. No one's introduced me with Video Night and Tribesmen and the Con Season. Oh yeah, so James is holding up right now. I appreciate that, because a lot of what I'll hear, and it's he's got a stack. A lot of what I'll hear, and it's a weird thing about kind of switching over to writing YA, which I don't consider it much of a switch, and we'll probably talk about that, where it's like I don't write all that much differently other than to be concerned with teen concerns. But because this book is like you said, those are indie books, and this book is in Barnes and Noble and all these different stores and Books A Million. So when people like get in touch with me, they're like, "I read your book," the singular, which is like, oh man, I'm glad they read it, but it's like to hear like 12 years of like publishing, and then to hear like I read your book, it's like, oh, there's so many other books.
So how did your horror fandom start? Did it start in childhood, and what kicked off your love for the genre?
It's one of those things I can't even, it's such a hard question to answer, because I can't even remember. And I imagine a lot of horror fans are similarly where I just can't even remember exactly what kicked it off, because it happened so young. And I think with us and younger people might not have the same experience, but with us, for me, it was going to the video store and seeing, in our supermarket, we had a little video rental like kiosk. So like kind of a mini video store in the Pathmark where I grew up on Long Island. So like, even before like my parents were taking me to the video store, like incidentally, I was seeing the kind of horror section of this mini rental place in the grocery store. So that's like, those are kind of the first images I can remember, just the kind of the posters and the cover art of things, and just always being drawn to that. Like I consider myself a cinephile and a movie fan. Like I enjoy every kind of movie, and I consider myself a reader, because I studied English for many years, and I don't only read horror and I don't only watch horror, but those are so clearly my main interests. Those are so clearly what I'm most passionate about. So yeah, just kind of forever, if that makes sense, for as long as I can remember.
I think me and Mike are kind of the same. We're both like avid horror fans, but we watch other things besides horror, and we both enjoy reading a lot as well.
But could you talk about your earliest writing experiences? Like what's the first time you realized that you wanted to be a writer, and how did that evolve into writing novels?
I and if there are any young people listening, if you're in middle school or high school and they offer electives, and there's like creative writing electives, it's not just kind of a fun, easy class to take. I would highly recommend, if you're at all interested in being creative, even if you're not interested in even if you're an artistic person, but you don't consider yourself a writer, I would take those creative writing classes, because they help you in kind of every aspect of your life, because writing is just communication, and writing is just like, all right, I have this idea, but how do I communicate it to a person? So those are kind of my earliest, other than like I used to make comic books when I was like a kid. Like I would just
Cool.
that's what the crayon sets were used for. Was like I was a huge comics fan. So like I never wanted to draw like just a normal like picture with a house and sunshine and mommy and daddy. I was always drawing panels. I was always adding like panels to things. So like those are maybe my quote unquote earliest writing experiences, but like writing short stories and feeling like, oh, I can do this, I can write like prose fiction, began in either middle school or high school. I think I took a number of creative writing electives, but I loved the kind of feedback I got there, and it wasn't always positive. Like I know that I was writing horror stories and I was writing scary stories, post Columbine, middle school and high school, and wanting to write kind of violent, morbid things, and nothing ever that got me in trouble. But I know that there are some teachers that are like, you're pretty morbid, this is on the line. Like, but it's just always been interested in it. So.
Okay. Did you get a lot of like encouragement from teachers or from your parents, despite the fact that some people might have considered it morbid at the time?
Like I said, with the teachers, sometimes a little pushback, but they were always very encouraging. I had a teacher in high school, Mr. Hodges, who ran a kind of the AV club, basically. It was like film and TV production, I think was like the name of the class, and there was no film. It was just mini DV cameras, and he was very encouraging of like, oh, go shoot a horror movie kind of thing. And then my parents are the most supportive parents in the world. I could have said I wanted to do anything. I could have said I wanted to be a bank robber, and they would have gotten me like the safe cracking kit. They're very, very supportive. And yeah, I think even though neither of them are like, my mom is a horror fan. My mom like is the person that introduced me to like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and these things when I was probably too young. But neither of them are like horror fans like us. You know what I mean? And my dad's not a horror fan at all, but they're just both know like, this is what the boy likes, support it, be supportive of it. So which I think is a good way to be as a parent. Now that I'm a dad, a first time dad, I'm looking towards them and being like, that's how I want to raise my kid.
So, what was the journey like when you became a writer? You started writing stories, and then it evolved into books. So, how did you end up getting published? How did that come about?
I think like a lot of writers, I was like, oh, I want to write novels. I want to be a novelist. Like, let me start writing a novel. So Video Night, I started writing Video Night before I had even kind of sent out James holding up visual aids here. Before I'd even started kind of sending out short stories and stuff like that, I was drafting Video Night, and I had gone to a convention that's not around anymore. It just recently stopped. It was the Rock and Shock convention in Worcester, Massachusetts, which it was a great convention because it was like a combination convention and concert series. But Jack Ketchum was a guest at one of those earliest ones, and he was always at them. And I think I'd kind of asked him for advice the first year I'd met him, and he was very gracious, and I was literally a kid. I don't even think I could like legally drink. I was like 18 or 19, and he said like, oh, what you should be doing is you should be focusing on things you can finish. You should be focusing on short stories and sending them out and getting feedback that way. Just because he, like the way he put it, he's like, if you're not married to it. And that was actually great advice, because that's when I started doing more short stories as I was drafting Video Night, the first early version of Video Night, which is kind of very different than the book that ended up coming out. But yeah, it was a lot of rejection at first, and then when you get that little validation of like seeing your name in print, even if it's like not that much money, it's incredibly validating and makes you want to keep going. So I don't do a ton of short stories these days because I love writing novels. But when I'm asked to do them, like if I'm invited to anthologies, I'll usually say yes. It's just fun practice because it's a very different format. Telling a short story or a satisfying short story is so different from a novella or a novel. They're just completely different formats.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things that I find interesting about your novels is that they kind of remind me a little bit of something like Scream, kind of in the sense that it's obviously coming from somebody who's like consumed a lot of horror movies and a lot of horror literature, and a lot of your characters are either like horror fanatics or they work in the film industry. And the progression of your writing is interesting because your early work tended to focus more on the positive aspects of fandom, like in something like Video Night. And then some of your later work, like the con season, and especially the first one you expect, that one really explores a darker side of like horror fandom. The first one you expect actually made me a little bit uncomfortable because it reminded me a little of myself. So I'm not a toxic person like the main character. That made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. So what inspired kind of like the switch in tone or the switch in like concentrating on more of like the negative aspects of horror fandom?
I've never been asked something approaching that, and I think it's an incredible insight. So I have to think for a second. I don't have like a set answer for that,
Sorry.
but no, that's a great question. I think it just became. So what's interesting, and to kind of, because James, you read them all, but
Yeah.
your listeners may not have. Clown in the Cornfield and Clown in the Cornfield 2, because they are YA books. I kind of went through this whole phase that James is describing, this idea of like, I want to write about movies and I want to write about horror movies and all the different aspects of writing about horror movies. And then with Clown in the Cornfield, when I knew it was going to be a young adult book, I knew that the kids picking it up may not have any frame of reference for what we're talking about. And I was like, you know what, in these two, they're going to be kind of about horror movies, but we're never going to talk about horror movies in them. Like because I see them as kind of a continuation of that kind of artistic body of work you're talking about. But even though when people pick them up, they're going to be like, this has nothing to do with horror movies. These are just like kind of meat and potato slashers in some weird way. But I consider them like the next phase of that thing. So I think, to answer your question, why I went from, I guess, probably the most positive and most kind of healthy portrayal of horror movies is Video Night. So that's the first one. And then I think things get a little bit more complicated in Tribesmen, because I think that it deals with like the exploitation to make an exploitation movie, like the capital E exploitation movie. And then you're right, I ended up with the con season and the first one you expect, which are like book length subtweets in a way. And I think I hope you read both of those books that are kind of a little bit more dark and a little bit more pointing out like the problems with fandom, and see that I do love this stuff. I still always love this stuff. I never dislike horror, but I think there's just fascinating aspects to fandom that so to answer your question, I never got a chip on my shoulder. I'm never like, oh, now I'm pissed off because I've been in the horror scene for too long. It's time to like take them down a peg. That was never my intention. I never wanted to do that. I think more of it's confidence in my own storytelling, and more of it's confidence in my own ability to, like, if I wrote the con season first, or if I wrote First When You Expect first and released that, I think people would be like, look at this curmudgeon, like, look at this asshole, like, who's he to like kind of talk about my scene or my genre in this way. I think it's almost like if you read them in order, you'll see that I'm very much coming from a place of I love horror movies, and in a lot of respects I love and respect the people who make horror movies, but there's also stuff about fandom, and I think in the First One You Expect deals with micro budget filmmakers and folks that, like, it's not any real person, but it's based on an amalgam of people like I've met at cons and stuff like that. And it's like, you can love horror, but you can be like, oh, this is a little sleazy, like in certain aspects. And I think, like you said, James, like Tony, the main character of the First One You Expect, like, I have him say like a horrible thing that I would never say, like on the first page of that book. And I think I do that on purpose. It's a word, it's like a slur that I've like never used and engaged with in any of my other books. But I think it's important that you establish right off the bat, like, you're not supposed to like this guy. Like, this guy's like a scumbag. But in the same respect, I think there's parts of all horror fans that can kind of probably see themselves in what this guy, because we share a common interest. So yeah, so I don't know, that was rambling, but I don't know if that really answered your question. But like I said, I think it's more of a confidence in my own writing and a confidence in the people that read my books to be able to, like, okay, you get that I'm like that I love horror, right? Like you, I don't want you thinking I hate horror. Or I'm like super jaded about things. I just
Mhm.
wanted to write books that deal with other aspects of horror filmmaking and horror movies. Because I think I can do that for the rest of my career is write about horror movies and not repeat myself.
I mean, I think that it's kind of cool that you tackle like some of the more difficult aspects of fandom because I feel like most people, and understandably, because a lot of us are very protective of it and we want to put ourselves in a positive light, that you're willing to go to a different place and show things that most authors probably would be uncomfortable, especially if they're trying to promote horror or promote the horror scene. Would be
Yeah,
uncomfortable doing.
yeah. And I very much am like protective of the horror scene and want people to love what we love and want to kind of proselytize and grow the fan base and things like that. And but I also think there's like you have to admit that like not everything is great and not everything is healthy. You can't just paint with a broad brush and be like it's in our genre. I love it. It's like no, you can still be critical of things and when you love them. Like so I think that's what those books are kind of about.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, can you pinpoint the book or books that inspired you to be a reader? And then what book or books inspired you to be a writer? And is it the same books?
Mm. They're different. Yeah, that's a great question because I think like the publishing has changed so much and public and the like the accessibility of stuff. Like when I was a I feel like when I was a kid, there was Walden Books in the mall, and there was the library, and it was a little bit more of a limited thing, like a limited selection of things you can get. So I was kind of I started very broad, like with like the Stephen King short stories and like Edgar Allan Poe, those collections that are in every bookstore, like so it started like very like okay, here are the foundational quote unquote foundational texts of horror, and those were the things I was interested in. Those were the things that my dad knew about, so that he was able to kind of point me towards things and read with me when I was very young. And then as I got older, um, with the proliferation of online shopping and the fact that you can like if you hear about something weird, you could just go get it right now, and just and Amazon will have it to you in 2 days, sometimes a day. Like so, like that changed the game substantially, so that when I was in later high school and early college and kind of being like, oh, I want to kind of do this with my life. I think it gave me access to these books that I'd heard about for a while or couldn't track down copies of, and those were I think the books that made me be like I can do this. And I think the example I use a lot is Joe Lansdale's The Drive-In. um, that first book especially. um, it's not like I read it and was like I can do this. It's more like I read it and was like, here's a book, like we were kind of just talking about, here's a book that's kind of about movies. Here's a book that's about so much more, and it's about it's about like friendship and hatred and humanity and all these different it has all these different aspects to it, even though it's about like an alien meteor that takes over a drive-in. Like it has this such a literary bend. You can't read that book and not be like, oh, this book has deep themes and motifs and ideas, even though it's about kind of B horror movies in a way. So I kind of saw that book and it gave me kind of the permission or like the idea of like, I can write what I love. I can write what I love talking about. I can write novels about it. And that was kind of the book in a way that set everything off, my access to that book.
Okay. Um, so when did you just so was it you that decided that Clown in a Cornfield would be a YA novel, and where did that idea come from to kind of like go to that switch?
A number of different things kind of lined up for that, but it always was that title, and it always was YA. And I had to kind of just, when I was in the early days of it, I was like, do I want to do this? Do I want to like, I wasn't a huge YA reader at the time. And I was like, well, do I feel comfortable in this space? Do I feel like I have something to say? I don't want to be like a carpetbagger who's coming into like a genre who like hasn't read it. And I got a lot of YA horror books, and I got what was like popular right then. And I read a lot. And I was like, no, I can definitely do this. And then I talked to uh, Emily Lacey, who's one of my best friends, Pat Lacey, his wife, she's an MFA in young adult literature, and I kind of picked her brain a little bit, and I was like, what are the things that I can and can't do in YA? And her answer was a great answer. It was the idea that like there's literally nothing you can't do as long as these books are attempting to speak to teenagers, attempting to speak to a teen audience, have teen protagonists, are about teenagers and what it's like to be a teenager. And I was like, oh well, like video nights like that already. Like, so I've kind of already written a YA book. So yeah, it was not a difficult switch. It was not something that felt hard to me. It was more the mental barrier of like, do I want to do this? This is so different than the stuff I've done before. But yeah, I don't think I'm going to stop anytime soon, because I've said this on other interviews and stuff like that. But it's like you'll have parents reach out to you or teens reach out to you and be like, this is my favorite book. And when you're writing books for adults, you're not really anyone's. You're like, it's very, very, very rare that you're someone's like favorite book. But when you're writing books for teens, and it could be the very first horror book they ever pick up, could be the first novel they pick up that they weren't assigned to read at school. Like, that's a huge responsibility and like a very cool thing. So like, I've really enjoyed that process.
I'm actually pretty drawn to young adult fiction as an adult, as an old man.
Oh yeah.
It's just more fun, more of what I want to see in a horror story, especially with the horror genre.
Oh yeah, it's like it drops a lot of pretension. There's a lot of like, there's the idea of like, you write a horror book now and they're like, well, how do we sell it? Do we sell it as upmarket fiction? Can we call it a thriller? Can we call it literary horror? Like, which everyone, all the adult horror writers who are writing in those quote unquote genres or subgenres, I love their work. But it becomes like a marketing thing. And like you said, like with YA horror, I don't have to worry about the idea of like, no, I'm going to write a teen slasher. Like, it'd be a way harder sell if you're telling people, no, this is an adult book, which I think content wise, you probably could just black out the teen on the spine and try to sell it as an adult horror book. And I think a lot of booksellers either on purpose or mistakenly put it in adult horror, which is fine with me, because kids can find it there too. But yeah, I think like you said, it's more of what is we as horror fans. I think we have similar, especially following the TikTok and what you guys do. We have similar aesthetics and things we're interested in. You're wearing a Terrifier t-shirt, so
yeah. Yeah, a lot of people assume that young adult fiction is watered down. Not necessarily. Not if you read Clown in a Cornfield, it's not watered down at all.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, and I think there's so many other horror writers that are doing the same thing. Madeline Rue and Danielle Vega and all these different YA authors that just happen to be writing horror, just happen to be writing YA horror. Yeah, they're fantastic books.
I mean, I don't really see that much of like a difference. I feel like this would appeal just as much to adult horror fans as a younger audience, because I think aside from the concerns, it's still R-rated material. It's still pretty graphic. It's gory. They use language, and of course, teens use language.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just I'm just saying. I was the teacher for a number of years. It's like everything they say in this book is stuff I've heard. So
yeah, if you're an uptight adult who thinks that stuff belongs in your youth, then these books aren't for you. But they're for us, because we try to keep the youthfulness in our entertainment.
Oh yeah, we got to stay young.
Yeah. So, you got a blurb from Clive Barker, who does, I guess I would describe Clive Barker as a more like, I don't know, like super adult type of writer. And his quote was, Adam Cesare is an author who knows how to make us afraid. How did you feel when you got that blurb?
Well, Barker wrote a number of young adult novels too, and like Magica, that series. But I think when we think of Clive Barker, we think of like Clive Barker, writer and director, because we think of like Hellraiser and Nightbreed. Yeah, I got that email because I didn't get the blurb directly. My editor got on the phone with Barker, and then he emailed me like a transcript of what they said on the phone. And I was in a car with my 3 best friends, driving down to Scares That Care, Virginia. So we were going to a horror con, and I got that email. I'm looking at the email, and like, I mean, it's not exaggeration to say, like, you guys understand that, like, that's like life changing. That's like one of the most insane things that's ever happened to me. Like I I tell other people when they're like, oh, Clive Barker blurb, I'm like, well, getting married and then just recently having a baby, I'm like, those two life events probably go above that. And then like that's a firm number three. Like those, that's like the biggest life event and like craziest, happiest thing that's ever happened. So like it was pretty wild in that car because we all went ape shit. Like but yeah, it's just like he changed my life. And then because it happened like over the phone with my editor, I was like, how do I like get in touch with him? How do I thank him? How do I like chance would have it like 2 weeks later, like maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, he was doing an appearance, and he doesn't do a ton of appearances these days, but he did an appearance at Monster Mania in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. So my buddy and I, Scott Cole, who's a great writer as well, we got on the bus over from Philly into Jersey, and we're like, all right, well, we're gonna go wait on like a 2-hour line to meet him. And I was like, this is gonna go from like the greatest moment of my life to like the worst moment of my life if he doesn't remember, or if he doesn't like know who I am, or if like it was all like smoke and mirrors and like they talked to like his assistant or something. I was gonna be like so upset. And we waiting, and like we were waiting outside in the parking lot, and they brought us up like 10 at a time in the elevator to like this private room where Barker was signing. And we get in there, and there's a huge, I mean, it took 2 hours. There was a huge line, and he stops the line, and he's like, oh, you wrote Clown. Like I was like, hey, Mr. Barker, you don't know me, but you blurred my book, Clown in the Cornfield. And he stopped everything once he like realized who I was. And he talked to us for a long while about my book, to the point where I was like getting embarrassed, where I was like, I could feel the people who were like, we just waited 2 hours to get out of this line, like just staring daggers at us. And then like he turned to Scott, and he's like, "Are you Adam's friend?" And it was like, "Yes." And it's like, "I'm a writer too." And he's like, "It's good to have a writer friend like him." And he just like he drew Scott this like Scott got his signature. And he drew Scott this incredible sketch where he wasn't doing any art or anything, but he was like he just it was just like an incredible experience. Like I said, it was just like what a kind man. I've only met him. I met him once when I was in high school. I met him in Comic-Con. He was cool then, but he just, signed my autograph and moved on. We didn't have much of a conversation, but this second time I met him, like, was, one of the nicest interactions I've ever had with another writer. It was just wild. Yeah. So
that's a dream come true for a fellow artist, like that's like John Carpenter telling me that I'm a great director.
Oh yeah, no, it's you really can't get, you just couldn't get much higher. It's just, it's insane. Yeah. So it was an amazing thing.
And I'm a big Clive Barker fan too. That like I would feel like I could die now if
yeah.
No,
I'm glad I didn't, but because all the stuff that came after has been pretty good. But like, yeah, no, I could have. Yeah.
Well, I'm very emotional, so I would have just started crying like a baby and embarrassed myself.
I didn't cry in front of him, but with getting the blurb, I did cry. I like definitely teared up a little bit because I was like, this is gonna change things, yeah. And it's funny because like I saw someone, I shared the and I'm sure they weren't trying to be a dick, but like I shared the cover of Clown 2, and like one of the first comments I got like was like, oh, you used the same blurb twice, and I was like,
so
brother, that is going on my goddamn tombstone. Are you kidding me?
Exactly.
Like, you're upset I used the same blurb from Clive Barker twice?
I mean, in all fairness, Clive Barker used the same blurb from Stephen King.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. I've seen the new face of horror, and its name's Clive Barker. Yeah,
there you go.
Of course, everyone does. It was just a weird comment to get, like, where I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, of course I'm going to use this again."
So, were you surprised about the success of Clown in a Cornfield?
Yes. Not to get too far in the weeds with bad stuff, but like
Okay.
that came out like 2020, like beginning-ish of COVID, like the beginning of like COVID being a real problem, like the idea of or at least a logistical problem. It's always a terrible thing, and it's a horrible problem, but like the idea of like shutting down businesses and things like that was like when that book came out. And there were so many shipping delays, and these books are like shipped or printed overseas and need to be shipped or something like that. Like there's all this stuff that like led to like me being like, oh, 10 or 12 years of writing books, and I finally get my big shot at like a book that's going to be in bookstores, it's going to be everywhere, and I couldn't believe it. And then like just kind of slowly coming to grips with like, you know, there's a lot of other problems in the world at the same time, but slowly coming to grips with the idea of like, oh, like I guess this book's not going to do well because like and I think everyone kind of thought that. I don't think that was just my own thing, because I think Harper was like, they were taking a chance anyway. They're like, we don't do a ton of horror, you don't do a like ton of horror like this. I think they couldn't print a ton, so like every bookstore, if they got it, they got like one copy. A lot of bookstores were closed. When I went to first get it, like first go see my book in a bookstore, it was like 2 days after release, and the guy was like, oh yeah, I think we have that, it's in the back. So like he like wasn't even like shelved, so it was just like I kind of was like, all right, checking my watch, like call it, like this is not going to happen. But I think the reviews really helped. Got starred reviews from like Booklist and other places that I can't remember right now, and I think word of mouth helped. People who liked it talked about it, and people who liked it like on Instagram, there's like a whole series of people who like took pictures out in cornfields or like dressed up like Friendo and did all this stuff. Like I think nothing I did comes close to what like it, for as far as promotion and stuff like that, comes close to like what people who liked the book did. So it's one of those things where like Mike's saying he gets emotional, but it's like it's one of those things where it's like you go from like being like this is it, let's move on, the drawing board, next thing. And I never really thought there would be a sequel. The first book ends in a way that like implies almost a sequel, but it was, in my mind, that's just what you do in slashers. Of course, you have to have that little like right before the credits stinger, like you have to have that little and the evil persists, like you have to have that, like, so like I was just writing that as like a goof, and a lot of people were like, oh, book doesn't even have a real ending, he's just setting it up for a blatant sequel. And I was like, I didn't I was like, no, I wasn't. I assumed this was the first and last book I'm ever going to get to write like this. Yeah, no, it's been an incredible honor to be able to continue, because I like the second book even better. That's not marketing hype. I think like I got to do weirder and wilder things in the second book, without spoiling what those are. But I was very surprised, very happy that Harper was encouraging of like, you want to do what? Hey, go for it. And then like I just yeah. So yeah.
Well, that brings me to my next question about the inspiration for Clown in the Cornfield and Clown in the Cornfield 2. Where while I was reading Clown in the Cornfield, I was wondering what films and books inspired it, because you feel like you're in a slasher movie until you're not. Like the twist you throw in there toward the last few chapters just takes you on a whole different trip. But then as I read Clown in the Cornfield 2, I didn't feel like that was inspired by anything except for the first book. Is that true?
To an extent, yeah. I think well, I love, like you mentioned, I love slasher movies, and I tried to look at it because I knew it was going to be a modern slasher. So I knew it was going to be like kids with cell phones, like very, very, very present day, like couldn't separate it from present day at all. But the idea of like going from like the 60s onward, going from like, proto slashers from like Peeping Tom and Psycho towards like the things that had come out like the week the book was due, like the so the idea of like slasher is a subgenre that has many different flavors, and it took a long time to become codified. Like when we think of like the Scream rules, like the Kevin Williamson like Scream rules, like so many slashers don't adhere to that at all. So many slashers break those, that it's like I feel like that's the thing that people have in their mind about like it was like a movie, a meta movie, like, oh, these are the rules, so I retroactively apply that to every movie. And I think it's not exactly true. So I'd really try to look at like the general slasher, and what is its general structure, and adhere to that very closely. And then, like you said, there's an aspect of like there's an aspect of like kind of the sad reality. Like we're talking about teens and teen concerns, and I'm remembering back to what Emily said about how to write a YA book. And it's like, well, what are teens scared of? Teens aren't scared of being a babysitter. They're not the Laurie Strodes. They're not scared of like a lone attacker with a knife coming after you and your friends. They're scared of like, they're doing like shelter in place drills every other week at school. They're doing like, you know, like they're doing like things like that. So it's like, what, how do you change that, deal with that in a slasher format is kind of the inspiration for that, where that third act goes. And then the second one, yeah, there's not as many direct, I feel like there's not as many direct references because I think I was trying to be less structured. I wasn't looking at slasher movies and being like, it has to be this. I was looking at the characters and situations in the first book and basically being like, what's interesting to spin out of all the implications of that? Like if you flash forwarded 1 year and you took this somewhat seriously and somewhat realistically, what would happen? And that's where 2 comes from. And like, I think people are just starting to get, because as we're recording this, Barnes and Noble kind of put the book out early, so people are like, just now, like people who like aren't like reviewers and stuff like that are getting the book. And I haven't seen so much of it, but I bet I'm gonna see people being like, this is too different, or this is too, like, this isn't what like the first book is at all. Luckily I haven't been seeing a lot of that, because I think people kind of connect with those characters enough to let the weirdness go. But I bet there's going to be some people who are not super happy that it's not the most traditional slasher.
I mean, one of the things that I loved about Clown in a Cornfield too is kind of how it kind of like taps into now. It feels like very of the moment, especially with the references to conspiracy theories, the mentality that goes into some of the most far-fetched nonsense that you could imagine. And you do this without it ever feeling like preachy or condescending, and you never like name drop anything. So, but things like spring to mind are like QAnon, Alex Jones, and Reddit. So what was, and weird as it seems, I kind of feel like almost everything in here feels like if Clown in a Cornfield happened in the real world, this would most definitely be the fallout for it. This is what would happen, especially in like our like conspiracy fueled state that we live in. So was this like really intentional, you trying to be reflective of the world that we're currently living in?
Here's the absolute truth.
Okay.
And this is somewhat of a spoiler, not really, but going along with what you just said, but the idea of like oh, wanting to be ripped from the headlines.
Mhm.
I pitched, like, I don't just have carte blanche. I can't just like write any book I want, even though they did want a Clown 2. I had to like pitch what I thought Clown 2 would be. So I had to get on a Zoom meeting kind of just like this one and be like, all right, guys, I'm going to blow your hair back. Get ready. Here's Clown in a Cornfield 2. And I had to like pitch it. So that was the day that a big national event happened, that people are going to look at Clown 2 and be like, oh, well, he's just like, this is going to not age well, because it's like, it seems like a rip from the headlines book, or it seems like it's like, so like, I'm 100% being honest with you. I did not write towards like any specific national American event that happened. I wasn't like looking back and being like, oh, I can make this like that. This was going to be the plot of Clown 2 before like things like that happened. And I think part of it is just I've been fascinated with conspiracy thought like for a long time. I've even tried to write I have 2 novels that never sold, that are partial novels, that are about kind of about like like online conspiracy theories, and like one of them's kind of serious and one of them's kind of like more of a joke, like, because I'm just fascinated with like the way that like people get sorted into algorithms and start believing this stuff. And it's like, as like if you consider yourself like a rational thinking person, you can look at a lot of this stuff and be like, oh, how the hell could someone believe that? And it's like, I think it's this weird insidious nature of like the internet. It's like, no, man, you could believe it. Like like you like it, like that's I think that's maybe part of what you're talking about, of like not talking down and not being preachy. Like I truly believe like anyone can believe anything if they like click on like the wrong few YouTube videos, and like could lead them down these like paths. Like, so I've been fascinated with that for years now. I've been trying to write like books that tap into that. And it was like, every publisher, every agent, my agent was just like, no one's gonna, this is too far-fetched, no one's gonna believe this. And then you have like all, like you said, the QAnon Alex Jones stuff, which is like wild. Now we're just seeing like all these different trials and all these different fallout from this stuff, and it's like, no, it's like it's affected the real world in a very real way. No matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, no matter what, like I think a lot of people, like a lot of rational people, can agree this is some crazy pants stuff. So I think it's always been an interest of mine, and I wanted to write like a conspiracy thriller kind of thing, and I thought, oh, well, what's a better way to do it than like Clown in a Cornfield has an air of like campfire tales, and like different, like there's all the different like legends of like Frendo and how he like came to be the spokesman of Baypen, which is the corn syrup factory in the town. And then you learn in the book that like, oh, it's all marketing hokum, like someone like made it up, like someone's granddad like made it up and they like put him on the bottom, like, so like there was already that idea in the first Clown in the Cornfield. So to extend it to like this idea of like invented history and like things didn't happen the way that you're saying it, like people arguing over like very objective facts, just felt like it made a lot of sense to continue with. So that's not to make anyone think that they're going to read Clown 2 and they're going to be like bummed out, or that, oh, this is like, this is like a current events thing. It's not like, I hope people can read it and just enjoy it as the slasher story it is, but it's just unavoidable, some of that stuff. Like once I started writing that story, it's like you're gonna have to allude to some of this real world stuff.
I mean, I think it's just all kind of how you approach it, because I kind of feel like art, music, film, books are always going to be like reflective of the current time and the moment. And sometimes stuff is unintentional. And like, I feel like kind of like the last Batman movie was like that, kind of taps into some of like the same type of online stuff that you're talking about in here. But I think it really works. I don't feel like, and it starts in the first one. It kind of addresses kind of ideas of like Trump's America in a way that's subtle. And I never get the feeling that you're talking down to that, like that side. Not to, because me and Mike have never shied away from like tackling a little bit more of like the thornier aspects of some of the politics of horror. But I found it very interesting. It seems to come from a progressive viewpoint, but never condescending to the other side, or you at least try to approach it with a sense of like empathy and understanding.
Yeah, because I have family that's like, I have family that's it's like it's one of those things where it's like you don't, like you said, empathy and understanding. Like we're all people, and I think this is like, I don't ever want fiction, because I think it's like the biggest bummer in the world to like open a book or watch a movie and be like, oh, this filmmaker thinks they're going to teach me something, or oh, this author thinks they're going to teach me something. And that's like the most, I don't think books should be instructive. I don't think film should be didactic. I think they should be, of course they should have ideas in them and they should have points of view, but they, like, if it becomes oppressive, or if it becomes annoying, or if it becomes preachy, like you said, like I tune out like immediately. Like those are like some of my elite. I'm a very, if you watch me online, or if you like see my like me talk about films online, like I get a lot of shit from my friends being like, he likes everything, like, but that's the thing. Those are the things I don't like. Anything that's like, when I get a whiff of like, this person thinks they're going to teach me something, like I hate that, and I just check out, because like I don't like moralistic stuff, or I don't like so like I appreciate you saying that about the clown books, because I don't like, that's the word, that's the last thing from my mind. And I think some people even like when you start dealing with that stuff at all, some people shut down and they're like, oh, this is woke trash, and like get upset. And I'm like, no man, like I don't want to do that at all. Like I that's not what interests me, and it's not why I like horror, and it's not like why I like books. So why would I try to do that to you, kind of thing,
I think the character of Rust kind of keeps that part of the story grounded, because he is kind of that small town mentality, redneck mentality guy, and that's why him and Cole kind of drifted apart. So I think he kind of keeps it from being preachy, and keeps it from looking like you're looking down on those people, because he's kind of one of them.
Yeah, and Rust is like my, like I don't know, like you're not supposed to like, I guess, have favorites, but I think like Rust is kind of my favorite character, and he's like a stealth protagonist in book 2 in a way. Well, spoiler, so Rust survives the first book. If you're listening to this, but I think they're like, he's super interesting, and I introduce aspects of Rust's character in book 2 that, fingers crossed, I don't know, like the first book I wrote, not thinking I was going to ever do a sequel or anything. But the second book, I was like, well, what if this does become a series? So I put a couple of things in the second book where I'm like, this would be an interesting thing to follow up on. Just like not stuff that like makes it feel like a serial or whatever, but just stuff that like aspects of his character and his life and his family particularly. And I'm like, it'd be really interesting to see X. And then so I put them in there. And I'm glad you like Rust. Yeah, like I said,
you really opened him up in part 2, yeah, and gave him more depth.
Yeah,
I felt like I knew him a little more.
He gets a lot of perspective chapters. I don't even know if he gets one in the first one, because I was trying to hide the ball of like, first of all, we're spoiling the hell out of part 1 because you kind of are supposed to think that Rust is maybe part of the like he might even be Frendo. So like there's a lot of red herrings with Rust. So now that you know that Russ is a good guy, you can read the first book with with that lack of suspense gone. But yeah, I think I was kind of careful not to get in his head. Like book 1 is a lot closer to Quinn's perspective. So you're getting her own biases. Like she's from Philadelphia. She's this East Coast kid who comes into this town and has all these judgments about the people in the town. And a lot of them end up being completely unfounded. And she's almost like that idea of like, not to like label it liberal conservative, but there's this idea of like this progressive quote unquote thinker that thinks they're like the most progressive thinker, but then would go to the Midwest and then have all these completely biased and bigoted thoughts about the people there. And I think it doesn't make them a bad person, because I don't think Quinn's a bad person. She's just young and she just has limited experience. So I think that's one of the things that appeals to me about that book, is showing how even the best of us can be biased.
I mean, the characters of Quinn, Rust, and Cole are very likable, and what I really like is kind of how you endear over the course of both of these books to like obviously the first one is a little bit more concentrated on Quinn, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of like Stephen King, where you get to know the characters on a personal level before injecting the horror, and that's kind of what makes you care so much about them. Did you start off with the characters of Clan in a Cornfield, or did you start off with the plot? I mean, what idea came first?
It's interesting. I never really think about it that way. I think it's like a trick, quote unquote, that I do in a lot of my books. This idea of like, if you give breakaway characters, like I do it in Video Night a lot, where it's like you're not even sure who's going to end up being like surviving to the end in Video Night, because you have these kind of tertiary characters like Todd Darrell, who's the cop in Video Night, where you get a lot of like his backstory, and you get a lot of like what makes him an interesting guy. So I kind of just like doing those little like sketch chapters, even if sometimes they don't make it into the book. There was a whole in the first book, Ginger, who is one of the kids, who's kind of one of the side characters. She gets a whole perspective chapter in an earlier draft, in the second to last draft of the first Clan of the Cornfield, and I almost like always wanted to work with my editor to put that back in like a future like extended edition, because I like getting to know characters, even if they're like quote unquote cannon fodder characters that are going to die. I think it's kind of important to like that you care why, like it's otherwise it just becomes like a cool kill set piece. But I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's like plot informs character and character informs plot. I'm a very practical writer in that way, where I know a lot of writers like follow their muse, and they're like, oh, like my story went in a completely different direction because my characters decided to do something today. And I always read stuff like that, and I'm like, they're not real, right? It's all you. Like you can you have some control over what they do. So like I think it's a little of column A, a little of column B, like what's the story, and who are the best characters to populate that story, and the most interesting way to tell that story. And then they like get fleshed out and shaded in as you go. And I've never written a sequel before, so that was like kind of the most fun about coming back to these characters and being like, okay, I have a much firmer idea who they are, so it's actually way easier to write them, because I know what Cole would do, and I know what Russ would do, and I know what Quinn would do in given any situation. And they're almost like a split psyche. Like they're three almost like on like the Myers-Briggs test. I bet they would score completely differently, because I think they would all do different things. And to me, that's interesting. You don't want characters that are the same, and you want the reader to kind of be able to guess, like, well, Cole's going to react to this in this way because he's this way. So yeah, it's just been fun doing sequel, which I never I never gave much thought to the idea of doing a sequel. I never really thought, and then I found myself enjoying it so much.
So you're a New Yorker living in Philadelphia now. So how did you tap into the small town mentality so well in these books?
Where are you guys located?
We're located in Southern California, but Michael is actually originally from Chicago, but grew up in Mississippi, so he has a lot of
Yeah.
experience with
Okay. Okay.
And a lot of this rang true for me.
I
I've
think it's just,
lived in
yeah.
California my whole life, so I have very limited experience, like Quinn.
I think it's a little bit of like guesswork, and it's a little bit of just like knowing people. Like I have a lot of friends who are not from my area, and I have a lot of family. I have a lot of family that lives all around the country, so I think that kind of helps. I have the horror hounds in Indianapolis and Ohio. Like I've stayed with family when I've done those, so it's like I think it's the idea of like getting out there and talking to people is part of hopefully what I tap into. Not that I think that like the book's any great treatise on like middle American life, because I would want to say that, because I am like the complete East Coast city slicker, like but I think there's trying to approach it and trying to do my due diligence and being like, well, what are these places really like? Because I think it's interesting, because we've been talking about all this like cultural stuff, but that's a big aspect of horror movies. That's a big aspect, especially of slasher movies. Slasher movies are incredibly regional productions usually, and that's part of why I think I like the genre, because I like watching 70s and 80s things from the 70s and 80s that show how different America used to be. Like it used to be not. Now you go to outside Cincinnati and like all the strip malls look the same as they look here, because everything's the same kind of chains. But it used to be such regionality to the country, and you get a little glimpse of that, especially when you're watching movies that were made independently and made for little money, that had to use real locations. So that's a big part of why I like 70s and 80s slashers and 90s slashers to a small extent, is to be able to see these kind of like time capsule movies that are like, okay, we're traveling. You have in the first Friday the 13th, you have like parts of Jersey you don't typically see on screen, because now everything's shot in California, or it's shot in Canada, made to look like other parts of America, and it all kind of looks the same, which is one of my biggest pet peeves with modern movies is, oh, like, okay, we're in Toronto again. Like I love Toronto. And then the weird thing is I love movies that are actually set in Toronto, but if it's Toronto doubling for New York, I completely check out. But if you watch something like The Silent Partner, which is like a Canadian movie set in Canada, that's supposed to be like about Toronto, that's great, because that's like a regional movie and has regional flavor to it. I hate these movies that feel like so homogenous in how they're presented and look. So I think that's a little side thing about what I like about slashers, is seeing different parts of the country. So I wanted to do that in book form. I wanted to do that like with Kettle Springs. It's like, well, let's pretend Kettle Springs is a real place and try to build it kind of from the ground up.
Yeah, and when your characters clash, you're not telling us one is right and one is wrong. There's a lot of times where both characters have a point.
Yeah. I think Russ brings up some great points. I think Russ is kind of the most eloquent arguer in the group, and the kind of the most thoughtful arguer in the group. So it's like I find myself agreeing, even though I don't think I'd agree with him on everything. It's like I think half of what Russ says, I'm like, yeah, no, I see that makes sense.
He seems to be not as ruled by his emotions as the other characters.
Yeah,
Russ.
I think that's I think he's a guarded person. You know what I mean? He's also a little slower. Like Cole is fast now. He's like impetuous. And it comes from that privilege of like, he's a literal rich kid. He grew up, he can have anything he wants. Quinn has had bad things happen in her life. She's completely thrown into a complete instability. She's like her one constant through these two books is that like nothing is stable. So she's on uneven ground, and Russ is just like, he's just going about doing what he's done forever, and that's his ability to like step back and be like more metered about things and more reasonable about things.
I know we were talking about cultural stuff, and sometimes I've noticed that there's some horror fans that turns off. We try to like use the podcast to expand on those ideas, because I think one of the things that I love about horror genre, especially the more independent it is, like you said, it ends up being kind of reflective or a document of the era it came out. A movie like Night of the Living Dead, like George Romero, I feel like was always tapping into something. And what I love about horror is it allows us to confront like these fears that we have in society and whatever turmoil we're going through and reconfigure it in a more imaginative way, in a more fun way, incorporating fantasy. And it allows us to deal with some of these things in a more indirect manner, but still confronting our fears and giving the audience a good time and a sense of fun. And I think that's one of the things I really appreciate about a lot of your work. It feels very now. It feels very tapped into the moment, and I think that's something that horror does better than any other genre. Like I feel like most like genres that try harder to like be a little bit more blunt about their message or to be more directly about some of the ideas kind of fail to engage me in the way that horror does because it does it in such a fun way and
Yeah.
taps into different things like that. And that's what I kind of really like about your work.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's so funny how I just think there's a vocal person for any viewpoint on the internet, and they're going to argue about it like things. But it's just is when you see that kind of stuff, and when you see like I don't know, I feel like the people that run Fangoria now get a lot of that and get a lot of like that hate kind of thrown their way about like, oh, get this like, get this get X out of whatever X is, whatever it's, any kind of issue, get it out of horror. Like, I don't want horror that talks about this stuff. And it's like, you look down and they're always wearing a Dawn of the Dead t-shirt and you're like, are you sure? Are you sure you want that out of your heart? Cause I don't 100%. I love the trashiest, most puerile stuff. Like I really, really do. And I do think there is a way to enjoy anything. I think there's a way to enjoy anything, even if it's like morally repugnant. I mean, like, look, not that it's the worst movie in the world, but I've got a Blood Harvest poster behind me on the wall, right next to a class of Nukem High. These are not moralistic treaties on on like the state of America in any way, shape, or form. But I also think you can be a conscious consumer of the things that you watch and the things that you like. I think you can. To me, that's part of the fun of movies and part of the fun of books. Like, why would the idea of like turn off your brain entertainment is such a weird argument to me. It's like, no, I could sit and enjoy whatever I want with my brain on. I'm cool. Like, I think that's that's so antithetical. And I think very few movies actually get made that way. And I think very few books actually get written that way. I think it's just a weird subsection of the fandom that wants to yell about this stuff that'll never be happy no matter what. Anyway, because if you gave them actually what they wanted, they wouldn't like it either. So like I think the idea of like keep X, whatever X ends up, solve for X out of horror is such a stupid argument. And I think we amplify it. We tend to quote tweet these people and like give them an audience when they wouldn't normally have an audience. So I think this is like actually it's a tiny subsection of the people that actually watch movies and read books and are actually consumers of this stuff. I think we're just getting a disproportionate read on it because on the flip side of things, to chastise the other side now, we get so hung up on this idea of like, is there a purity test? Is what I'm watching okay to be watching? Is that it? Like, which as someone who just pointed to my Blood Harvest poster, I don't believe in that either. And not to say I'm any kind of like moderate or like to play both sides. I think the idea that you're going to be like a school marm about some of this stuff and tell people what they can and can't enjoy and tell people tell filmmakers and tell writers what they can and can't write about. If you would tell these people they sound like Nancy Reagan, they'd fall over dead in their chair. But they do. It's so funny that you can go so hard to the other side of things that this is a taboo or this is not okay, and you end up sounding like the people that are like your mortal enemies online. So I think everyone just needs to chill out, take a deep breath, and enjoy horror cinema and horror literature with their thinking caps on. I think is the main thing.
I mean. Like what's cool about that is like you mentioned like movies like Blood Harvest and like I feel like a lot of like trash cinema and exploitation cinema, even if it doesn't have loftier goals, kind of ends up reflecting culture anyway. I feel like a lot of the exploitation movies of the 70s are a result of a couple things. I mean, one's like the Hays Code being lifted, so you're able to exploit more, but I also think it's because of like Vietnam and the more cynical the country was becoming, it
Yeah.
produced art that was more cynical, like movies like Jack Hill films, which I know you're familiar with because I've
Oh,
seen
I
you
love Jack Hill.
talk about it
Yeah.
on, like,
Yeah.
I feel like his stuff is never preachy, but I feel like a movie like Coffee, like kind of like really taps into something that a
Yeah.
certain type of feeling that's going on at the
As a
moment.
real point of view too, like something like Switchblade Sisters, you're like, and it's like not even like I'm sure I wouldn't agree with Jack Hill on a lot of this stuff, but I love that he's saying it or presenting it in his quote unquote genre of films, like his quote unquote like turn off your brain movies. And then I think there's stuff like where it's all incidental. There's stuff like Blood Harvest where I don't think Bill Rebane had any kind of
Mhm.
thematic or goals or motifs beyond like wanting to make a movie. But like you said, you can unpack, you look at it and it's like a time capsule. It's this regional made in a place where not a lot of movies are made, and you can kind of like approach it in that way and look at how fascinating it is. I don't think you have to watch every movie thinking you're going to write a college term paper on it, but I do think you can watch movies and take more away from them than what is directly literally on screen. I think in almost every case, even like the lowest of brow stuff, you can do that. Like, yeah, and it's
Do
not
you
wrong. It's not wrong to do. You're not reaching for a for a point or something that isn't there.
do you feel that some films go too far, and how do you feel about some fans like demonizing other horror fans for liking films like a Serbian film?
Here's the thing. I don't think movies go to. I don't think like I'd ever come out and be like, oh, this should have never been made. Like I definitely don't see myself ever being that kind of person, unless actual people were hurt in the process. Like I can't ever see myself saying that. But it's also like there also is the level of the question of taste and whether or not I want to have that on my shelf or I want to, to support it or I think I'm very much in the mindset of like go with God. Like I know a lot of friends that love very very extreme stuff, especially when it comes to literature. Like, and I have friends that write it that are like the most extreme people you've ever met, and they're just sweet teddy bear people. Like when you meet them, doesn't mean that that's my cup of tea taste wise.
Mhm.
And it's I'm also a little bit of a hypocrite because I absolutely love Jack Ketchum. I've read everything Jack Ketchum's ever written, and some of it is stomach churningly upsetting. Um, but I kind of pick and choose. You know what I mean? Like when it comes to the rest of extreme or hardcore horror, I kind of pick and choose, and I don't, I haven't seen a lot of the movies that make those like this is the most depraved thing you've ever seen. Like I haven't seen a lot of them because I'm just like I know that's not for me. But uh, that's fine. Make them. Go for
Yeah.
it.
I mean, I kind of feel like with books, it's a little easier to get away with something. Like, example, like Cannibal Holocaust, as a
Yeah.
your book like Tribesmen. Cannibal
Yeah.
Holocaust. I mean, I understand and I respect it, and I know you're a fan, and Michael likes it too. I don't care for that movie, and it's more because some of the circumstances surrounding it.
Oh yeah.
But I think it is with a book like Tribesmen. I think it's easier to swallow these ideas, some of them, because you don't involve other people in it. This is all purely out of your
Yeah.
imagination.
Or animals. Yeah.
Or animals, yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't so much say I'm a fan of Cannibal Holocaust because I'll give you an example.
Okay.
My buddy and I, Scott Cole, we're here in Philly, where there's the Exhumed Films crew. If you guys have heard of them, they do all these incredible 35 millimeter screenings, 35 millimeter and 16 millimeter screenings, and they did a double feature of The Man from Deep River and Cannibal Holocaust, and we went and we saw it. And I turned to Scott right when it was over, and I was like, you know what? I still appreciate Cannibal Holocaust. I still, I'm glad we went to this show, and I'm glad we saw it. But I'm pretty sure this is the last time I'm ever going to watch it because I saw it on 35 millimeter. I was like, that can't really be kind of topped, and it's just like it's so unpleasant, and all that stuff like the muskrat and stuff like that, and the turtle. It's so hard to like get those images out of your head that I'm good. Like I wrote a book about Italian cannibal movies, but I'm also kind of good, so it's a weird thing where, and I think in some ways, Tribesman's kind of about that. Tribesman's is about like that when you make an exploitation movie and you're not just exploiting the audience, like it's when you're not just exploiting the audience expectation. There's a lot of exploitation movies that were made in exploitative circumstances, and it's kind of what the book's fun. The book's like a kind of a haunted house on an island thing, like, but it's not too subtly about that idea of like, I'm gonna go make a movie and I'm gonna exploit a bunch of natives in order to do it, and that's, you know, that's where I kind of fall on it. Not that my books are any kind of like mission statement, not that my books are like my final word on anything, but that's part of why I wrote the book. Is
Okay.
I wanted to ask you, can we hope to see Clown in the Cornfield in movie form sometime soon? And would you ever adapt one of your own books into a film?
Those are good questions. The movie's getting worked on right now. It's Temple Hill Productions. They have an incredible track record with YA adaptations, the Maze Runner movies, the Twilight movies. They've done the YA book to movie kind of pipeline before. I'm not super involved, other than the fact that I've read the script and I know kind of little like bits of like who we've got attached as director and stuff like that. But as far as that, like, I'm good not kind of adapting my own work. I'm good not I'll offer opinions when they ask them, of course, but like, kind of the writers always kind of, when movies are concerned, the writer's kind of always like the last person they talk to, even the screenwriter half the time. But I love movies and I love writing screenplays. So I've had, just this last year, I've had 2 screenplays produced, which is incredible because I'd never had anything made. And the movies look good from what I've seen. I even got to visit the set of one. They haven't been announced yet, but those are originals. Like, I like writing stuff that's not my books, because I think in a way, I think, hey, I will be first in line to see Clown in the Cornfield, and I'm sure I will reap the benefit of like a media tie-in edition of a paperback. And I would love to sell more books and reach a wider audience. But as far as I'm concerned, the books are my final cut in a way. You know what I mean? Like, I've told that story to the degree that I exactly want to tell it, and then I'm cool moving on.
So do you feel that the script captured your story when you read it?
Yeah, it's different. It's different, and I'm sure it's going to change because the way these things work. I'm sure it'll change again. I think the script is like, gets the soul of it exactly correct, and then like the circumstances,
Very
like there's
cool.
whole sequences, and there's a lot of stuff in the screenplay version, which is very good. The writer's very good. They wrote it. That's very different. And who knows how much of that, if it ever gets made, because you have to talk about all this stuff with the biggest of asterisks next to them, because like, I don't believe, look at Batwoman, or look at Batgirl.
Yeah.
Like, I don't believe a movie exists until I'm literally walking out of the theater having just seen it. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, so much can happen with this stuff, and I've had that happen before. Like, even before Clown, I've had options and things, and phone calls and meetings with people that like things have completely dissolved. So I never talk about that stuff even before. Like, I never talk about this stuff before I get paid, and then even then sometimes not, just because it's like, you don't want to get people's hopes up. People are like, oh, I can't wait to see the movie, and I'm like, I think they have, you know, it's clearly a, you know, big budget, like great production company, and people involved in it, and I have every confidence in the world they're going to get it made. But I don't look a gift horse in the mouth, and I don't like, to me, it's not real until, like I said, until the credits are rolling and I'm walking out and dump my popcorn in the bin. So, yeah.
I'm really looking forward to seeing. You said original films you're working on. You've
Yes.
worked on,
They're both co-written, or
written.
yeah,
Okay.
both co-written. They're both with collaborators I've worked with before that you'd almost be able to guess, but I don't even want to talk about that much because I don't know how
Okay.
pissy producers are going to be if I start talking about them. So,
So
I got an interesting email the other day. It was like a group email. It wasn't because I said something, but it was like, remember, keep X off social media. Like, don't share pictures of what you saw in like this, because we're trying to like. So like, it wasn't me, but I know that someone, like either an actor or someone must have posted something that pissed them off enough that they would send an email to the whole production to be like, don't post pictures of it.
So, what's in the future for Adam Cesare as an artist? I mean, one of the things I know is you recently had your first child. So do you see this changing or influencing you as you evolve as an artist?
I think it's just a different kind of life. I mean, it's just a different way to to live. I'd be crazy to think it's not going to impact me. I don't really know how it's going to impact me. I don't think I'm all of a sudden going to be writing like little golden books. But I don't, I don't know. Yeah, I've just got a lot of irons in the fire, and I'm kind of always trying to do something different. I love comics, like I said, and I've got recently announced a Dark Horse. Dark Horse is publishing Dead Mall, which is a 4-issue miniseries illustrated by Dave Stahl. It's cool. I've written tie-in comics before, but I've never written something that was like that I wrote kind of from the ground up. It's I'm talking to the right guys. It's Chopping Mall meets Nightbreed meets The Ruins. Like it's
Nice.
it's kids in an abandoned shopping mall that's not so abandoned. And it's very comic booky in that way, because the mall is the main character. The mall is the main antagonist. So the mall is like the narrator of the book. And I don't mean that in like a Scorsese way of like New York's really a character in Scorsese films. I mean like the mall is actually the bad guy. So like this kind of stuff you couldn't really get away with in movies, and kind of couldn't get away with in books. I feel like you can do in a different way in comics. So it's fun. So I'm just looking to I'll take everything as it comes. My next book has been handed in, hasn't been announced yet. I'm really, really happy with it. It's another YA book, but it's about as different as you can get from Clown of the Cornfield. It's very different. And it's Clown of the Cornfield's like fun horror. This is like serious horror. This is like upsetting horror, which is, I'm very amazed I was able to do it for a YA audience, but that talks about the idea that you can do anything in YA as long as it's about teens. Yeah.
Well, I have to ask you about one of my favorite horror authors, just because I never get to talk to anybody that reads them. Poppy Z. Bright. Have you read Poppy Z. Bright?
I've read Drawing Blood. I feel bad. That's the only point of reference I have. I have their books. Like I have a large vintage paperback collection, so I have them all. I know it's one of those things I got to go back to. Which is your favorite? What should I read next?
Probably Exquisite Corpse is probably my favorite.
That's the big one. I think I was drawn to Drawing Blood because it's about a comic artist, so it was kind of like let me read that one, and I really liked it. But Exquisite Corpse, yeah, I'll get to it.
But I like it because I see shades of Clive Barker in there, but it's something completely different. I was really devastated when they stopped writing horror fiction.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like you can't blame a writer for like their decisions, but that like it's such a fan base, and a lot of those books are either out of print or like only print on demand. Like I'm sure there's going to be a Poppy Z. Bright kind of renaissance once like TikTok kind of finds them and puts them, all it takes is one. Like it takes just like one of those books going viral, and then it's like, and then every publisher and every bookstore in America is going to be like, I got to get copies of Exquisite Corpse in. I got to get copies of Drawing Blood in. I think a lot of backlist authors who either have moved on from writing horror or have moved on from Earth. I think there's like a lot of them that like I kind of bet that's going to eventually happen with, because it's such a weird format of like TikTok doesn't care if the book's out of print. TikTok doesn't care if the book's small press, which is amazing. It's this great equalizer, but it's in a way it's like the great equalizer, but it's also like a lottery ticket too. Because if you're like a writer and you're like, man, I hope the algorithm, like someone holding up my book cover goes viral, and then you sell out a whole print run of it. So like it's wild how that can happen with social media these days.
Yeah, I mean, Book Talk is pretty influential. I mean, the way that people talk about stuff on there. And I remember when I came across you on my For You page, I got so excited. I was like, holy crap, that's Adam Cesare. So we're getting down to the end, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. I would a couple more questions. So you have a YouTube channel, Project Black T-shirt, and
which I haven't updated in a little while because I've been so busy trying to launch Clown 2. But I've got stuff lined up for Halloween. Around Halloween season, I usually come back and actually do it weekly. So I'm going to, believe me, I'll come back. It's not a dead channel. If you go there right now and you're like, this guy hasn't uploaded in 3 months. No, it's not. I'll come back, believe me.
I mean, one of the things that separates you from like other horror channels or is the way that you incorporate books into the film discussion. So you like to discuss maybe an interesting exploitation movie or a Vinegar Syndrome release, and then pair it with a book that somebody might enjoy, if they enjoyed that movie. So I'll just pretend this is your channel. Books would you recommend to people who, I mean, what movies would you recommend to people? We'll do it inverse, who enjoy Clown in a Cornfield and Clown in a Cornfield 2.
Um, I don't know. I would go deep into the. I would try to like go to the slashers that not everyone's seen. And I bring them up all the time just because they're like easy shorthand things. I could probably go stare at my go stare at my shelves for a little while to think of better answers. But stuff like Blood Hook, which I think is a great regional slasher, has such a. I mean, it's not like it's like Clan of the Cornfield, but it's in that same genre. Just Before Dawn, Graduation Day. I love Graduation Day. It's one of my favorite high school slashers. Night School. Speaking of regions, I went to school up in Boston, and I love Night School's like one of the better Boston movies. There's like it's like a better Boston movie than Departed. There's like more of Boston in it. So I love Night School. Like those. Like I would say, go a little deeper in the slasher pool. If you like more modern stuff, or you want like Cherry Falls for 90s slashers. I love Cherry Falls. Those kinds of things. Yep.
I think it has folk horror vibes too, as well as slasher.
Oh yeah, there's definitely that like idea of like the rural versus city, and then like Quinn kind of as almost the main character in Wicker Man, and in some sense, and that she's walking into this thing that she doesn't know is like kind of set in motion all around her. So there's definite folk horror vibes. It's funny because it's just from a marketing perspective. I think James is almost going to hold it up. He's going to hold up the summer job. Yeah. So I've like I wrote like a deliberate folk horror movie or a book. God, it's too long. It's 2 days. It's a long day. I wrote So I kind of just like when people want folk horror and I'm selling at a convention table, I always like point them to that. But I think you're right. I think there are aspects of folk horror. I never really thought about it like that. That's great, Mike. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Anybody out there who's interested in independent work, Summer Job is the one that probably creeped me out the most, especially the introduction, the way that you like really sucks you in. Like, 'cause I love folk horror, so yeah, this one's highly recommended to the audience.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, I'm going to be reading all your books now because I read Clown in a Cornfield and Clown in a Cornfield 2, and now I'm hooked. I want to read everything you
I appreciate
wrote.
it. I'm gonna read more Pop Easy Bright. This conversation made me feel like I really need to. Yeah.
So
Cool.
what's the best way to support your work and the best places to purchase your novels and novellas, or what do you prefer? Is you prefer them people going to bookstores or Amazon or
Anything helps me. I really like what I tell people is the easiest way. Like the way you buy books normally. I understand that Amazon is this big like corporation, and I understand that like the brick and mortar, the chain bookstores are big corporations, but I also like they're also the place that people buy the most books. You know what I mean? Like they're also the place that in a weird way I'm dependent on them because I'm dependent on like the analytics of like people also bought, and like so like I completely understand when people want to shop local. You could go to your local bookstore and have them. If they don't have Clown of the Cornfield and Clown of the Cornfield 2, they will be more than happy to order it for you. They can, the way that Amazon set up and stuff like that and self-publishing set up, they can also order in my small press books if you want to support your local indies. But I don't think people should feel quote unquote bad that they shopped at a big store, at a Target or at a Amazon or at Barnes and Noble. It all helps me. So really just whatever you're comfortable with. I get the same money and I get the same support that way. So really, however you most like reading books. A lot of people like audiobooks. However you listen to audiobooks, iTunes, Audible, and also there's also like the idea that you don't have to buy any of this stuff. You can go to your local library. I'm a big supporter of libraries and the library system, and librarians have been very good to me because they always recommend my books around Halloween and stuff like that. So go to your local library. If they don't have it, just ask nicely, talk to a librarian, start a conversation. And they'll be more than happy to order them in for you. I get paid for those too. So like that all helps me. So really, however you get your books is completely fine by me and all helps me. So I appreciate it.
So your independent horror books, they're a little bit harder to find. You have to mostly go to Amazon for these,
Yeah.
right? That's how
Yeah.
I kind of purchase
Yeah,
it.
they I think they're in Barnes and Noble too, and I think you really could do a special order for them at most indie bookstores. And there's bookshop.org now. We'll sell them to you as well, which is Ingram's imprint that supports indies. But yeah, like you said, they're not on store shelves, so a lot of people, especially if they're young people who've just read Clown in the Cornfield, they don't know they exist. But I think they would like them. I think they'd enjoy if they checked them out. So,
Would you have any advice for up and coming writers?
finish what you start, I think, is a huge one. I think the it's so easy to write the first third of a story. Um, it's like that's when you're humming and when you're riding on the seat of your pants and when you're the words are really flowing, and it's so much harder to get up the next day and do some more and get up the next day and do some more. And I also don't believe in the you have to write every day thing. Some people say write every day. That works for some people, and some people are working 3 jobs and can't write every day. I think it's like incredibly arrogant to think that someone has to write every day to be a writer. I and I know some of my friends prescribe to that idea, so I just called them arrogant. But I said what I said. I think just write, finish what you start is so much more important than write every day. In my book.
And it was great advice, as you said before, about taking creative writing classes.
Yeah, because I think writing, a lot of people like to think of it as like the muse and it's like abstract thing that can't be taught. And to a certain extent, like maybe imagination can't be taught, but writing is very much a skill like any other skill that you get better at as you do, and you can learn it. Like you learn by reading and you learn by writing. So, and you can learn by other methods where people are teaching you craft and stuff like that. So yeah, especially if you're young people, especially if there's teens listening, take those classes.
Cool. Yeah, I think you're muted, James.
James,
I
you're
muted
muted.
myself. I muted myself. I'll edit that later. I wanted to thank you for coming on the podcast. It's been a really great honor to speak to you because I'm a really big fan of your work. I love your writing and your style, and there's something very relatable to me about it. So thank you so much for coming on and being so gracious with your time.
Well, I appreciate you both so much, and thank you so much for all your support and everything. Yeah, it means a lot. So it was great for me to get to talk to you guys. Yeah, it's very, very appreciated. And this will be going. Do you know when this will go up?
I'm gonna probably get it up within a day or two, so
Okay, cool.
It'll be before the official release of Clown in a
Perfect.
Cornfield.
Yeah. So buy these books, people. Thank you.
Highly,
I had such a great time talking to you guys. This is really really special. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. So please go check out Clown in a Cornfield if you haven't read it. Awesome book. If you have time by the time this comes up, I mean, try to pre-order Clown in a Cornfield too. It might be a little bit late, but either way, get it as soon as it comes out. And if you like them, please check out any of Adam Cesare's like independent works. I really love them, especially The Summer Job and The First One You Expect. Again, thank you so much for your time.
And when you read Clown in a Cornfield, you're gonna think there's no way he can improve on this, but he does. So check out part 2. And the official release is the 23rd, right? But it's kind of out.
Yeah, the 23rd, but for like some retailers, like most Barnes and Noble just have it now. But yeah, order it online, then it'll get to you hopefully the day or two of release. So thank you guys so much. This is great.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, Adam.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
That was a fun interview. I really hope you enjoyed it. I'm a really big Adam Cesare fan. We got to address a couple things. So sorry that we haven't been doing podcasts as much lately. We've been very busy, and we've updated you from time to time on The Dead Place, which is Michael Pickle's newest film project that I'm also that I'm producing with him. And that's been taking up so much of our time that we don't have it in us to like do a podcast every week. But for big ones like this, we're going to keep it going. And in the future, we're going to start picking back up at our normal pace. It's just for now, we're slowing down just a little bit. We're not disappearing. We're just slowing down and saving the podcast for bigger events like this particular interview.
And since we last updated everybody on The Dead Place, we have 9 cast members cast. The best cast I have ever assembled. You will not believe how phenomenal these people are. And we only picked these 9 cast members because James and I watched their audition tapes, and we were immediately, that's that character. Very talented, very natural. It's a mix of veterans that we've worked with over the years and new up and coming kids from 13 to 18 to early 20s. So it's really going to be a great project. 15 years in the making. We already filmed the crowdfunding video, part of the crowdfunding video. The crowdfunding campaign starts in October, and one of the main cast members we'd like to announce, if you haven't seen it on our page, David Howard Thornton is our horror villain, the new kid. If you don't know David Howard Thornton, he is Art the Clown from Terrifier.
And he's on that shirt right there that Michael is wearing, and that Adam Cesare just mentioned and noticed on the podcast too. So
and go back and listen to him on the podcast. We interviewed him a while back.
Episode 67. Episode 67 is our interview with David Howard Thornton, if you're interested in hearing that. But yes, he'll be playing the villain in the film, and I think it's exciting because he's become kind of a modern horror icon, and I think social media has helped kind of spread the word of Art the Clown and all of like the appreciation groups that he has on Facebook and social media. And he's most famous for being a mime, a silent but very, very terrifying. Obviously, it's why they call him the Terrifier, silent character. And he's an actor who's very dedicated to kind of like his vocal performances. And if you've ever heard his Joker impression, he does like a spot on, almost like Mark Hamill-esque version of the Joker. And this is the first time as a villain. He's had speaking roles and more of like supporting roles in other movies, but this will be the first role as a villain where he's speaking. So we're really excited to be kind of introducing that element and trying to give another side to this actor, another side, because he is great silent. He's great with just the miming and terrifying you silently, but we hope to exploit things that you don't really get in Terrifier.
And we give him a lot to do in this one, as far as being menacing and the practical makeup effects. I'm not going to give anything away, but wait till you see it. You think, oh, wait till you see.
Like
Just so excited for it.
To keep up with all of the updates that we have for the Dead Place, follow us on all of our social media, because it has been mentioned on every platform that we've done. We've discussed it on every platform. So if you follow us on Facebook, which is facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show, you're still going to get all of our regular content, all our news, all our updates, horror anniversaries, retrospectives, but you'll also be updated on the project on a regular basis. Follow us on Instagram. What is the Instagram again? I always forget this one.
Instagram, The Horror Show Pictures.
The Horror Show Pictures on Instagram. Follow us on the TikTok page that I run, which is @HorrorShowOfficial, where I post podcast clips and I discuss various things going on, and I try to keep up with the current horror news and just do little specials of things that I do on TikTok. I have a TikTok video talking about the Dead Place right now, and I'm going to keep using that platform to update you on what's going on. So follow us on any platform, and you'll be able to follow the progress of the film. Thank you so much for tuning in. We love what we do. We couldn't do this without you. We're very excited for the future and all the things that we have going on. And interviews like this and interviews on our last podcast, which was a while ago now, like the Addams Family, makes all of this so much fun and so worthwhile. So we really hope you enjoyed our interview with Adam Cesare. There'll be links to everything that we do. You can find the links to our social media in our description. And for this episode, we'll give you some links to where you could find Adam Cesare's YouTube channel, and where you could purchase his books, his novels, and novellas, and short story collections.
I'll be reading all of it after reading these two books. Clown in a Cornfield 1 and 2.
Till next week, folks. Happy
horror.